I had to do a little bit of like speed up and stuff in editing there because it was very, very slow. To the fans across the globe, both past and present, and to the crew who brought the originals to life, we offer our profound and heartfelt thanks. And there we go again, my friends. We have seen the last credits for our Final Fantasy mainline journeys. I think, where do you even start? How do you start to talk about and summarize a franchise that has been running since 1987, so literally, what, 37 years at this point? A journey for me that's been running since 2014, a journey that began in about 2004, of course, with Final Fantasy X, a journey that's taken thousands of hours of time over those 10 years to put together, and a journey that's taken me to places I never thought I would ever go, and places I couldn't even dream of going all those years ago. So I think all I can really say at this stage is just two sets of thanks, I think. First, of course, to the names that you've seen throughout the credits of the Final Fantasy games. Of course, we always talk about, you know, the godfathers of Final Fantasy, those big names that everybody who's played a few Final Fantasy titles will know. But it really takes a team, it takes a village, it takes a whole group, a legion of very talented, passionate people to put these games together. And throughout our journeys, you know, we played Final Fantasies that have been absolute masterpieces, like some of the best games of all time, and some of them are not. But regardless, I think every single time, when it comes to the people behind these games and the love and passion they have for their job and for Final Fantasy, for me at least, that's never been in doubt. And I want to congratulate everybody that's been involved in a Final Fantasy game over the years for everything that you guys have done and for everything that you guys have achieved as a franchise over the last 37 years. And it's just been incredible. It really has. And you know, as I say, the quality of the games, for me at least, especially in the later years, they've kind of been a bit more up and down and mixed, and there's definitely some in there that are not classics. But the overall strength of this franchise, having played all of them, so many of the games are, you know, really good or excellent or, you know, a masterpiece. Like, they fit into those top tiers, a lot of them across the years. And as someone who's finally been able to play all of them now, I think I can say that pretty confidently. So just a massive thank you to everybody behind these series. It's changed my life. It's brought me to where we are today, where I have this YouTube channel that has become my full-time job, and I have so many amazing connections that I've made throughout the world. And it's as I say, it's just taken me to places I never thought I could ever go, and places I didn't even know existed. And so there's no way I can ever repay, you know, Final Fantasy for that, really. All I try to do is just try to enjoy the games, try to share my experiences with you guys, and try to spread my love for the franchise and my favorite aspects of it with the world. And for me at least, that's all I can do. I can try to make you know, the best content that I can, and hope to get more people to enjoy these games and to have their own experiences with them. And over the years, I've been blessed enough to hear from so many people who have managed to do that. And for me at least, that's been a massive part of the journey, and being able to just share what I love and have people resonate with it and respond to it in a positive way and have their own adventures and make their own memories with these games has been super special to me. So thank you so much to everyone that's been involved in these games. What a journey it has been, and of course I'm looking forward to more from it in the future. So that's kind of the Final Fantasy developmental Square Enix, Squaresoft, Square side of things. But of course, you know, this is a large collection of YouTube playlists and an even bigger collection of videos that I have made since 2008. Primarily since 2014, of course, when the first full Final Fantasy playthrough was done on the channel. And since then, as I say, we're talking about more than 16 games, because of course we have like 10.2 and 13.2, 13.3, all that kind of stuff. As a collective, thousands of episodes, thousands of hours of time has gone into recording these, into editing them, into uploading them, into sharing them with you guys. And the fact that there's people who have basically been there from the very start, who've been there since 2014, and followed me across this journey and got to see me experience these games for the first time. It's just something that I just don't know how to thank people enough for supporting me and for being a part of that journey all the way through. And regardless of where you began your own Dan's Go 8 journey, where you saw me play my first Final Fantasy game and hopefully ended up watching some more of the playthroughs, just thank you all so much. Obviously I couldn't have made it to the end of this journey if it wasn't for the incredible amount of support I got from everybody. I think as a fan of the franchise, as a fan of gaming, obviously even if I didn't have the YouTube channel anymore, I wasn't doing it full time, I just didn't have the time to make all of this content anymore, I would have always loved to have played through all of the games anyway, and I probably would have. But obviously the fact that I got to do it in this way and share it with so many people, and all of the feedback and the support and the love that I've enjoyed throughout has just been so special. And so a massive thank you to everybody that has been watching all of these series. You guys are the best, and I'm just a very fortunate person to have had this incredible stretch in my life where I've had the ability to do something like this, and so I try to enjoy it as much as I can, and I really have. It's truly been a magical experience, and I'm very happy to have made it to the end of it. So to talk a little bit about the game, I mean, honestly, that for me at least, there's not that much to talk about for the game. It's one of these where I don't have like an hour-long thing to discuss for it, because it's so like, it's really just like the quintessential, like the place where it all began. And compared to where the series went, there's definitely a lot of things that clearly have followed through right from the beginning. But this is its own little special thing. And I just feel like I can't criticize it almost, if that makes sense. Like, it's just so special that this game exists and what it ended up spawning, that I don't particularly want to try to analyze this game too deeply or anything like that. It's the kind of thing, maybe in a retrospective type of thing, you could have a more deeper look at it and, you know, really dive deep into what this game is really about and why it worked and why it spawned such a incredible franchise. But for me, it's just like, it really is quite a simple game. It's probably the simplest Final Fantasy of them all, but it just touches on something I think just very fundamental about, you know, going on a journey and having an adventure. And I think it does that, and that's all it really ever needed to do. It basically just presented us with this world. It gave us a little bit of a premise. It said that you are the warriors of light. It made you kind of embody the warriors, and it said, okay, get out there and save the world. And, you know, you explore the world, you see, like, you know, all of these different areas, all of these different caves, all of these things that you didn't know existed before. You meet all of these people in these towns, you find out more about what's going on in the story and the world, and your characters get stronger, and all of these just like things that aren't really that unique to Final Fantasy specifically, but that when you put them all together and the way that they presented it, with the music, you know, and with their own art style, and with obviously the bosses that they created and that kind of thing, it turns something that's very fundamental and almost universal in terms of, you know, stories and adventures and experiences, and they found a way to turn that into something that is Final Fantasy. And for me at least, that's why it's still, all these years later, there's still something about it that's just very pure and still fun to play. Of course, you know, as I've mentioned throughout, in terms of things that I didn't enjoy as much, I still think, I think because I started my Final Fantasy adventures with 10 and played the later games first, I think for me at least, the whole kind of challenge and experience of Final Fantasy being about dungeons, like dungeon crawling and looking for paths through dungeons while having a huge amount of encounters and trying to both navigate through the dungeon itself, like literally finding out where to go, and also trying to manage your resources as you were going through. That's fine and it's okay, but for me it's not where I get the most enjoyment out of my Final Fantasy experiences. And so for that reason, all of these earlier Final Fantasies that lean into that a bit more, for me at least, it's just not as enjoyable as what came later on. And so obviously this game, it set the standard for that. It was like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. You know, there's going to be lots of encounters. They're going to be very repetitive. Using magic is fun and cool and all that, but for example, you have 8 spell slots, and you're going to face 50 encounters in a particular dungeon, so you can't use magic for 42 of those, unless you have a whole ton of ethers, which you probably wouldn't have for most of the game. And so that type of way of wanting you to play the game, it's just something that doesn't really vibe with me, and that's why the earlier Final Fantasies I think are never going to be my absolute favorites of the franchise. But I think, of course, like, it's over time as I played more and more of them, it's a type of design that I've just got more used to playing and that I've appreciated in its own way, even though it's not my favorite style. But I think the way that the earlier Final Fantasies did certain things that still impressed me and that I genuinely enjoyed, and I kind of wish carry through to more of the later Final Fantasies at least, is the way that they have these kind of things going on in the world, and the way that you can find out what they are and learn more about what's going on by talking to NPCs in towns. I always found that really cool. It really encourages the spirit of exploration and talking to people, and it really helps you to sort of paint a picture of what's going on, because you would have points in the game where there'd be like 3 or 4 different threads going on, like things that could potentially be happening in the story, and by having more conversations and exploring, you'd kind of organically end up figuring out where to go next or what to do next. And that more kind of slightly open-ended style of play that isn't really open world per se, but that is definitely a lot more open to interpretation. Like, you could end up going somewhere that you shouldn't go much earlier, or you could have 2 or 3 different areas to go to at the same time, and only one of them progresses the story, and the other ones are more like optional things, or you can go there but you can't complete the event yet. It comes with its own issues, but I always liked going into these towns and talking to the townspeople and just sort of figuring out different clues. And later on, when you find a connection, for example, like the whole like scholar thing and like the language, for example, it's really neat to sort of remember, oh shit, like 10 hours ago I spoke to this one guy in this faraway town, and that person's become relevant again. And if you completely skipped that whole thing, you just wouldn't have been able to be a part of it. And so I think for that kind of thing, I really enjoyed the earlier Final Fantasies. And as Final Fantasies kind of changed over time, I feel like that became less and less important. And NPCs, like chatting to NPCs, end up becoming a bit more of a just, you know, you get a bit more context about the world, or, you know, you find out, you know, how people are living their lives in that town and that kind of thing. But I feel like connecting a little bit more to story and progression and giving you clues about certain things is an aspect of the early Final Fantasies I definitely enjoyed. And so I think, yeah, I would say the spell slot system is, I think by the end it ended up being fine because we didn't really have too many MP issues, but I think early to mid game I don't like the spell slot system. I just feel like it's a bit too restrictive, and having sort of these magey characters that you're constantly kind of thinking about, do I have enough spell slots? I'm on floor number 2 of a dungeon, there might be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more floors. I don't think I can use any more magic. I just feel like when you free up your mages to actually do mage stuff, it's just more fun. And so that side of it I still wasn't a big fan of. The general, I think, you know, the classic deep, complicated dungeons that lead you into a lot of dead ends and traps, and then you also have the huge amount of encounters on top. Like, the combination of those two things is what I generally have not been as big a fan of. And of course for me in this one, I think the boss battles were a bit disappointing. I expected a little more. Stuff like Chaos actually wasn't too bad, honestly. But I think a lot of the more kind of major, what should have been major bosses, unfortunately they were a bit too much of a breeze. But that one I'm putting down to potentially it was maybe a bit of a pixel remaster thing, where they made it a little bit overly easy. I'm not too sure. But at the end of the day, I did put a poll out there, and Pixel Remaster won by a landslide. And I still assumed that it was something that was trying to be a bit more faithful to the original. And so I still went for it, but obviously it has its flaws. There were a few things, like for example, I think it was the Fear spell, which just straight up doesn't work in the Pixel Remaster. And I'm just like, come on man, like was it really that hard to just remove it from the game? Or to have it function, like either of those two things? So the Pixel Remasters definitely have their own issues too. And so some of the things I didn't enjoy as much maybe don't apply to the absolute OG original experience. But based on what I played, I mean, that's all I can really talk about for Final Fantasy 1. So I think that's about the extent of it. I think story-wise, like, you know, Garland, Chaos, You know, the 4 crystals. The time loop thing is kind of interesting, but obviously it's a little bit of a thing they kind of started to hint at a little bit more towards the end, and obviously at the end they give you a bit of explanation of it and stuff. It's a cool idea, but it's not something that I found myself particularly like invested in or interested in. So I think story-wise, it was what it needed to be for a first game. I mean, there was nothing too kind of deep in there. I definitely much prefer the deeper stories that happen later on, where your party members have their own character, they have their own arcs, they have their own interactions, and you build kind of your own personal opinions and relationships with the characters and that kind of thing. I think that's much more my style. I find that much more immersive, and I get a lot more invested in the story and the experience. But again, the early Final Fantasies, especially the first 3, they kind of have their own style when it comes to that stuff. And so again, it's not really for me, but it's not something that I particularly hated or thought was bad or anything. It's just a different approach that I personally just don't click with as much as what they started to do in the later titles. So yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Final Fantasy 1 is and will forever be a classic and an incredibly important game, and I'm glad I got to play it for you guys and round off the series. And so I think from here, the final things I really have to say are just, again, the kind of stuff that they were talking about at the end, actually, with like the final kind of epilogue kind of scrolling text. Final Fantasy, I think, has this really special power of connecting people and just bringing out the light in people. It really does. I mean, the time I've spent on YouTube has been such a big example of that, and the sheer amount of people from different backgrounds, different age groups, different belief systems, different ethnicities, all of these things, the way that Final Fantasy has had this sort of transcendent power to unite all of us together under the enjoyment of this particular franchise has been absolutely incredible. And it reminded me a little bit of some of the stuff I talked about at the end of Final Fantasy 13, actually, where basically I think that game approached it a little bit more thematically, like it was part of the game and the story, but this is more of an overall comment, I think, just on Final Fantasy in general. I just feel like, again, it's especially nowadays even more than it used to be. I just feel like everything that happens in the world and the internet and social media and the news and all of that kind of stuff, everything is just so polarized and so geared towards like conflict. Everyone is so ready to jump on everybody else and to put people in boxes and to fight about things and to make character judgments about people and all of these kind of things. And I'm just like, it just feels to me like something that unfortunately just kind of takes us away from the essence of who we should be as human beings. And I feel like Final Fantasy, or any kind of creative work or franchise or that kind of thing that allows people to put those things to one side and just enjoy things together, I think that we need more of that kind of thing in the world. You know, things that kind of bring us together, make us forget about all of those other things, because we spend so much of our time and so much of our day having to deal with so much of this bullshit that we probably don't need to. And it's just a nice way for us to kind of just remember the fact that we're all human beings, and no matter where we come from, no matter what we believe, there are going to be things that we are going to unite on. There are going to be things that we agree on. There are going to be things that we love, no matter how different we all are. And sometimes I just think like we need to focus more on those things than the ways in which we're different, because the end game of, you know, focusing and always talking about how we're different and what we don't like about each other, we all kind of know where that eventually leads in the end. And so what I've always tried to foster with this community as well is an aspect of, look, we need to all acknowledge that if we all were to sort of sit down and, you know, pour out everything that we believe and everything that we think, everything that we've experienced, everything that we love, everything that we hate, all of it together, and we all knew these things about each other, and we all discussed them and debated them and fighted about them and judged each other for them all the time, this community wouldn't exist. It would break apart, because it would constantly be too much of a, oh, I thought, you know, this person, I thought they were a good person, but they actually believe this, or they don't like this, or, you know, they love this, or whatever it might be. And I feel like that's just, for what we've created here on YouTube, I feel like just focusing on what we love and what we appreciate and what we enjoy has generally been, I think, a lot more productive and a lot more fun and just a lot more wholesome, I think, for everybody involved over the years. And so thank you to you guys as well for being a part of that, because of course I think it's the kind of message and the kind of thing that, even though I don't vocalize it very much, I think it's the general kind of thing that people understand. And in the community, we just focus on enjoying the games, on entertainment. We don't constantly talk about the ways in which we're different and what's going on in politics and the world all the time and that kind of thing. There's so many other outlets for that kind of thing, and we can always fight infinitely about those things. And doing that with people on the internet that you don't know, who are just there to watch a guy play Final Fantasy games or to play video games, it always just felt silly to me. And so Final Fantasy, at least to me, it's one of those, it's such a force for good, ultimately. What it's been able to do in the world and bring so many millions of people together to enjoy something, I think that's something to be celebrated. And it's something that I will always try to celebrate and uphold on the channel. Because, again, the forces that be, I think they always want us to be kind of at each other's throats and bickering, and just like, you know, if we're always constantly fighting these little battles against each other, we kind of lose sight of the bigger picture, and maybe sometimes the bigger things that are going on in the world, and things that we should be taking notice of, that we become blind to because we're too busy fighting amongst ourselves, essentially over nothing. And so yeah, I just wanted to kind of draw attention to that stuff now that I've reached the end of this journey once again, and just thank again Final Fantasy for being a series that I think has been able to achieve that with everything that it's done over the years. Despite, obviously, there's going to be fighting in amongst the community and that kind of thing, that's kind of guaranteed. But I think big picture, the stuff that we've experienced as a community on the Danzgo 8 channel as well has really shown us that it really does have that kind of power. And so a big thank you to Final Fantasy for achieving that. And so that brings me to the final question. Where do we go now? Obviously, there's been an air of finality about this. I've been talking about the end of a journey or this kind of stuff, but I've always kind of tried to add the caveat that the end of every journey is the beginning of a new one. And so, of course, this doesn't mean at all that this is the final kind of Final Fantasy we're going to play, or I'm only going to play new Final Fantasies that come out from now on. So if there's not a new Final Fantasy for another 4 years, I'm not going to do another playthrough on the channel. Of course, that's not the case. First of all, we're going to look into some of the other Final Fantasy games that aren't the numbered ones in the series. And the top of that pile is Final Fantasy Tactics. It's a game I've heard much about. It's a game that apparently has one of the best stories of any of the Final Fantasy games, numbered or not. And so I'm definitely looking forward to giving that one a go and trying it on the channel. So in terms of like the next proper Final Fantasy playthrough, like blind Final Fantasy playthrough, it's going to be Tactics. I think that's the one I'm going to start with. And then maybe there's one or two other spin-offs that I might be interested enough to bring to the channel. So World of Final Fantasy is another one I've been thinking of. Still unsure about that one, but it might happen, so just stay tuned for that. And we'll look into any other spin-offs that might potentially be interesting in the future. So that's one kind of side of things. Second side is, of course, modded playthroughs and challenges. It's what I love to do, and especially in more recent years, I think the amount of mods that have come out for Final Fantasy as a collective have definitely increased, and there's some incredibly high quality, very, very good mods out there that transform the experience and allow you to play these games with new eyes and to see things in a different way. It's something I've loved to do with Final Fantasy X, and I always mention as one of the main reasons I've still been able to maintain my love affair with that game for so long after playing it so many times. You need to, after of course you've played a game once or maybe twice or maybe 3 to 5 times, you need to find new ways to enjoy it, because obviously there's diminishing returns every time you go back to a title. And so for me at least, for Final Fantasies I don't love like a huge amount. If there's a modded version or there's a very interesting challenge for it, even as my second playthrough, I'm definitely happy to give that a go. And especially for example, this Final Fantasy or some of the earlier ones, I've talked about how the boss battles or generally like the gameplay outside of this sort of slogging through random encounters and resource management has been too easy and hasn't really been deep enough or interesting enough for me. And I'm sure there's mods that address that up the difficulty and that make things more interesting. So I can definitely try to play through some mods and stuff for some of the earlier titles as well. So that's another thing you'll potentially be seeing in the future, is modded playthroughs. And of course we have challenge content where there's infinite amount of different ways to play these games and to enjoy them. And so if I come up with something interesting, that motivates me and I think people will be interested to see, I'll definitely give that a go as well. And the final aspect of this is that now that I have all of the Final Fantasies completed, I have said it for years, I have held off doing any kind of listing or rankings or tier content because I don't have experience with all of the games. It always felt silly to me to sort of, ranking the top 10 boss battles in Final Fantasy history if I've only played 6 of the games, or 7 of the games, or 8 of the games, or whatever it is. Now that I've played all of them, I feel like I can have at least somewhat of an informed opinion, and that means I'll be able to share some stuff like that with you guys over time, and we can, of course, fight about them. Because that's the kind of thing I'm happy to fight about. Talked about that whole, like, let's focus on what we love, but I think as it pertains to Final Fantasy, as long as it's kind of good-natured and well-mannered or whatever, you know, done in the right way, I'm always happy to argue and discuss those kind of things when it comes to Final Fantasy. So, yeah, definitely going to be bringing you guys some of that content in the future as well, and we can definitely see how the community responds to my takes on like rankings and tier lists and stuff for all things Final Fantasy. So yeah, that is the summary of what to expect for Final Fantasy in the future. We've got tier lists and rankings and that kind of thing. We have modded playthroughs and we have challenge playthroughs. We have some spin-off games to come, and we also of course have future Final Fantasy titles to play as well. So it is far from the end of Final Fantasy on the channel. In fact, in some aspects it is only just the beginning. So thank you for joining me once again. I'll be back with more Final Fantasy content in the future. I will see you all soon. Take care.